kicked out into the freezing rain on her 18th birthday, a desperate orphan was discarded to rot on the streets with absolutely nothing. Her only lifeline was a mysterious letter granting her a ruined, abandoned mansion, a terrifying inheritance that felt like a cruel curse. She had no idea this decaying nightmare secretly harbored a staggering hidden fortune, and she never suspected it concealed the exact weapon she needed to trap a greedy intruder, claim a breathtaking legacy, and completely rewrite her destiny. The rain in Portland was merciless, slicing through the thin fabric of Carlotta's worn denim jacket. It had been exactly 22 days since her 18th birthday. There had been no cake, no balloons, and no celebration. Instead, there had been a heavy garbage bag filled with her meager belongings tossed onto the wet front lawn by her stepfather Richard. Her mother Brenda had stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, staring firmly at the ground, refusing to meet Carlotta's eyes. The message was clear. She was an adult now, and she was no longer their problem. For 3 weeks, Carlotta learned the brutal reality of the streets. She learned which shelters were safe, which alleys to avoid, and how to sleep with one eye open, her backpack strapped tightly to her chest. She was exhausted, hungry, and entirely alone. The world had turned its back on her, and she was rapidly losing hope. That hope flickered back to life on a gloomy Tuesday morning inside a crowded downtown soup kitchen. A man in a sharp charcoal suit, looking entirely out of place among the city's forgotten souls, approached her table. He introduced himself as Thomas Harrison, a probate attorney. "Are Carlotta Evans?" he asked, his voice gentle but professional. "I've had a private investigator looking for you for nearly a month." Sitting in his pristine, oak-paneled office an hour later, a steaming cup of coffee trembling in her hands, Carlotta listened to a story that felt like it belonged to someone else. Her biological father, a man who had vanished before she was even born, had passed away years ago. But her paternal grandfather, Ashwin Mehta, had died just 2 months prior. Ashwin was a complicated man, Mr. Harrison explained, sliding a thick manila folder across the desk. He was a recluse, highly paranoid, and estranged from his entire family. But he left a specific provision in his will. His entire estate, specifically his primary residence in the coastal town of Astoria, has been left entirely to you. Carlotta's heart hammered against her ribs. A house, a roof, walls, a place where Richard could never touch her, where the rain couldn't reach her. Is there any money?" she asked softly, thinking of her empty stomach. Mr. Harrison sighed, adjusting his glasses. "That is the unfortunate part, Carlotta. The estate is completely devoid of liquid assets. Ashwin's bank accounts were drained years ago. Worse, there are 3 years of back property taxes owed on the estate. You have precisely 60 days to pay the county $12,000, or they will foreclose and seize the property." The fleeting warmth in Carlotta's chest turned to ice. She didn't even have $12, let alone $12,000. But she had a set of keys. She had a destination. Using the $50 bus ticket Mr. Harrison had generously provided out of his own pocket, Carlotta took the Greyhound up the rugged Oregon coast. The entire ride she envisioned a quaint, sturdy home. She didn't need luxury, she just needed safety. When she finally stood at the bottom of the driveway at 442 Briarwood Lane, the reality of her inheritance crashed down upon her. The Mehta estate was a massive 3-story Victorian monstrosity that looked as though it was actively rotting into the earth. The gray paint was peeling off in diseased-looking strips. Half of the windows were violently shattered, their jagged edges like broken teeth. Overgrown, thorny ivy crawled up the side of the house, seemingly the only thing keeping the sagging porch from collapsing entirely. The roof was missing dozens of shingles, leaving raw wood exposed to the relentless coastal storms. It wasn't a sanctuary, it was a nightmare. Pushing the heavy brass key into the rusted front door lock, Carlotta had to put her entire shoulder against the wood to force it open. The smell hit her instantly, a thick, suffocating stench of mildew, wet wood, and decades of stagnant dust. She walked through the cavernous downstairs. The furniture was draped in moth-eaten sheets. The wallpaper was peeling in massive sheets hanging from the walls like dead skin. In the kitchen, the linoleum was cracked, and the ancient cast-iron sink was stained with rust. There was no electricity. The water had been shut off for years. Dropping her backpack onto the dusty floorboards, Carlotta sank to her knees. The utter devastation of the house mirrored the devastation in her soul. She had been handed a lifeline only to discover it was an anchor dragging her straight to the bottom. She was 18, homeless, and now the proud owner of a ruined, unsellable liability. As the sun set, casting long, terrifying shadows across the empty parlor, Carlotta pulled her knees to her chest and wept. Survival instinct is a powerful force. After her first freezing, terrifying night, sleeping on the floor of the parlor, wrapped in a musty tarp she found in the pantry, Carlotta woke up with a hardened resolve. Crying wouldn't fix the roof. Despair wouldn't put food in her stomach. If she was going to lose the house in 60 days, she was at least going to sleep with a roof over her head until then. Her first priority was heat. The coastal chill was seeping into her bones. Armed with a rusted fire poker she found near the massive stone fireplace, Carlotta began scavenging the house for anything she could burn. The house was a labyrinth of strange architectural choices. The hallways were unusually narrow, and the ceilings in certain rooms felt oppressively low. Ashwin Mehta had lived here alone for 40 years, and the house felt like a physical manifestation of a chaotic, paranoid mind. On her third day in the house, Carlotta's stomach was violently cramping from hunger. She had been surviving on half a loaf of bread and peanut butter she bought with the last few coins from her pocket. Desperate for firewood, she ventured into what used to be a massive library at the back of the house. Most of the books had rotted to mush, but the heavy oak bookshelves lining the walls seemed dry enough to burn. She wedged the heavy iron poker behind the corner of a massive built-in bookshelf, throwing her meager weight against it. With a violent crack, the rotting wood gave way, pulling a section of the wall's baseboard away with it. Carlotta stumbled backward, coughing as a cloud of ancient dust plumed into the air. When the air cleared, she stared at the gap where the baseboard had been. It wasn't just a space between the studs. The exposed cavity was lined with dull gray metal zinc sheets, creating a perfect, moisture-proof tunnel inside the wall. Sitting inside this hidden compartment was a heavy dark green metal lockbox. Her breath caught in her throat. She dropped the poker, falling to her knees, and reached into the dark space. The box was incredibly heavy, its surface cold and slightly greasy to the touch. She dragged it out onto the floorboards. It was secured by a heavy brass padlock. Adrenaline surged through her veins, temporarily overriding her hunger. She grabbed the iron her might. Clang! She hit it again and again. On the fifth strike, the rusted internal pin shattered, and the lock popped open. Hands trembling, Carlotta lifted the lid. The first thing she saw was the unmistakable pale green hue of old paper money. Bundles of it. She gasped, falling back onto her heels. She reached in, pulling out a thick stack wrapped in a brittle rubber band. They were $100 bills, older series printed in the late 1990s, but perfectly preserved. She frantically counted the first stack, $1,000. She dug deeper, pulling out 4 more stacks, $5,000 in cold hard cash. It was more money than she had ever seen in her life. It was food. It was warm clothes. It was survival. But as she moved the cash aside, her eyes landed on the second item in the box. It was a thick black leather-bound ledger. Carlotta opened it carefully. The pages were filled with erratic, jagged handwriting. It was her grandfather's journal, but it wasn't a diary of daily events. It was a chaotic mix of architectural diagrams, strings of numbers, and paranoid ramblings. "They think I lost it," read an entry dated October 14th, 2005. "They think the markets took it all. Fools. A bank is just a house you don't own. I own this house. I own the walls. The foundation is a lie. The blueprint is the map." Carlotta frowned, tracing the ink with her finger. She flipped the page to a hand-drawn diagram of the very library she was sitting in. The drawing showed the bookshelf she had just broken, but it also showed a dotted line extending beneath the floorboards leading toward the center of the house. Beside the diagram was a single heavily underlined phrase: "The first 5K is for the finder. The rest is for the worthy." Her grandfather hadn't died broke. He had hidden his fortune inside the rotting carcass of the estate. Suddenly, the hair on the back of Carlotta's neck stood up. Outside, cutting through the silence of the damp evening, came the distinct crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. Carlotta froze, shutting off her small battery-powered lantern. She crept to the shattered window, peering through a crack in the wooden boards she had nailed up the day before. A dark, unmarked pickup truck had parked near the overgrown hedges. The headlights cut off. A figure stepped out of the truck, moving with quiet, practiced urgency. Dressed in a heavy, dark raincoat, a flashlight gripped in one hand. Carlotta's heart pounded against her ribs like a trapped bird. She watched as the figure walked straight up the rotting steps of the front porch. A moment later, she heard the unmistakable sound of a key sliding into the heavy brass lock of the front door. The handle jiggled. The door didn't open. Mr. Harrison had changed the deadbolt 2 weeks ago when the estate went into probate. A low, masculine voice cursed loudly from the porch. "Damn it, Harrison!" The prowler knew the lawyer. The prowler had a key to the old lock. This wasn't a homeless drifter looking for a place to squat. This was someone who knew exactly what Ashwin Mehta had hidden inside the walls, and they had come to claim it. As the heavy footsteps began to circle the exterior of the house, looking for a broken window to climb through, Carlotta backed into the shadows, clutching the $5,000 to her chest and gripping the heavy iron fire poker in her right hand. The real nightmare hadn't been the ruined house. The nightmare was whoever was coming inside. Footsteps echoed heavily on the wraparound porch, each creak of the rotting wood sending a fresh jolt of terror through Carlotta's frozen body. She pressed herself flat against the shadowed wall of the library, the heavy iron fire poker slick with sweat in her palm, her other arm wrapped securely around the metal lockbox and the $5,000. A flashlight beam sliced through the darkness, illuminating the swirling dust motes in the hallway outside the library. Then came the unmistakable, violent shatter of glass. The intruder had given up on the locks and simply smashed the narrow window beside the front door, reaching in to twist the deadbolt. The heavy front door groaned open. "Filthy old rat trap," a man's voice muttered. Carlotta held her breath, closing her eyes as the beam of light swept into the library, missing her hiding spot behind the ruined bookcase by mere inches. As the man stepped fully into the room, the moonlight caught his profile. He was young, perhaps in his late 20s, wearing an expensive-looking raincoat over a tailored suit. He didn't look back a burglar. He looked like a Wall Street broker. He pulled out a smartphone, hitting a speed dial. Carlotta strained to listen over the erratic thudding of her own heart. "Yeah, I'm inside," the man whispered aggressively into the phone. "My father changed the locks, the old fool. But the homeless girl isn't here yet. I checked the local shelters. No one has seen an 18-year-old matching her description. I have a few days before she claims the property to find the central cache." Carlotta's mind raced, piecing the fragments together. His father, the probate attorney Thomas Harrison, was a good man, but his son, who evidently had access to the firm's confidential files, was trying to steal Ashwin Mehta's hidden fortune before the clueless, destitute heir could even arrive. The man, oblivious to Carlotta's presence in the deep shadows, walked straight toward the massive fireplace in the center of the library. He began tapping the brickwork with the handle of his heavy flashlight. Ashwin was completely paranoid, the man continued into the phone. The notes in the probate files said he withdrew nearly $3 million from his brokerage accounts before he died. He didn't trust banks. It has to be in the walls. I'm checking the primary load-bearing structures now. He took a step backward to assess the chimney, misjudging his footing in the dark. Carlotta knew this house better than he did. She had spent 3 agonizing days memorizing every hazard to survive. She knew exactly what lay beneath the faded Persian rug he had just stepped onto. A section of flooring completely hollowed out by severe dry rot. With a sickening crack, the floorboards gave way beneath the man's expensive leather shoes. He let out a sharp cry of panic as his right leg plunged straight through the floor, burying him up to his thigh in jagged, splintered oak and ancient plaster. His flashlight flew from his grip, shattering against the stone hearth and plunging the room back into pitch blackness. "Damn it!" he roared, thrashing wildly. "My leg, it's stuck!" Carlotta didn't hesitate. She didn't try to play the hero, and she didn't reveal herself. Using the cover of his pain, shouting, and the absolute darkness, she silently crawled out of the library, clutching her heavy lockbox. She navigated the narrow, pitch-black hallway entirely by touch, slipping into the cramped pantry under the main staircase. She locked the flimsy wooden door behind her, curled into a tight ball, and waited. It took the intruder nearly 20 agonizing minutes to extract himself from the floorboards. Carlotta could hear his vicious curses, the sound of tearing fabric, and his heavy, limping footsteps as he finally dragged himself out the front door. The engine of the pickup truck roared to life, tires spinning angrily in the gravel as he sped away into the stormy night. She was alone again, but the game had fundamentally changed. As dawn broke, painting the peeling wallpaper in hues of pale, watery gray, Carlotta sat on the kitchen counter, the black leather ledger open on her lap. She was exhausted, starving, and terrified, but a fierce, unfamiliar fire burned in her chest. She wasn't just a victim anymore. She wasn't a stray dog waiting to be kicked. She was a Mehta, and she was sitting on top of the $3 million secret. The first thing she did was leave the house. Walking 3 miles into town, she found a hardware store. Using a few of the crisp, late 90s $100 bills from the wall cache, she purchased a heavy-duty deadbolt, a crowbar, 2 high-powered LED lanterns, a hammer, heavy work gloves, and a prepaid cell phone. Next door, she bought hot, fresh food, 2 massive breakfast sandwiches, and a gallon of water. It was the best meal she had eaten in her entire life. Returning to the ruined estate, she immediately installed the new deadbolt on the front door, barricaded the shattered window with heavy timber, and locked herself inside. Then, under the brilliant white light of her new lanterns, Carlotta decoded her grandfather's descent into madness. The ledger was a masterpiece of paranoia. Ashwin Mehta had believed the global financial system was on the verge of total, catastrophic collapse. He had spent the last decade of his life converting his considerable wealth into untraceable physical assets, hiding them in a place no bank or government could touch: the very bones of his home. The 5,000 Carlotta had found was a decoy, a meager offering meant to satisfy petty thieves and keep them from looking deeper. The real prize was detailed in a series of cryptic architectural drawings located in the final pages of the journal. "The roots hold the tree," Ashwin had written in erratic cursive. "Water flows down, heat rises up. The false floor breathes where the coal once slept." Carlotta grabbed her newly purchased crowbar. The puzzle wasn't in the walls, it was beneath her feet. The basement door was hidden behind a false panel in the downstairs hallway. Something Carlotta would never have noticed without the ledger's precise diagrams. The air down here was different, thick, freezing, and smelling intensely of damp earth and rusted iron. Guided by the beam of her lantern, Carlotta descended the rotting wooden stairs. The basement was massive, matching the footprint of the sprawling Victorian house above. It was a chaotic maze of old furniture, broken grandfather clocks, and stacks of yellowing newspapers dating back to the 1980s. She bypassed it all, her eyes fixed on the ledger's final instruction: "Where the coal once slept." In the far corner of the subterranean space sat a massive, brick-lined coal chute, a relic from the early 1900s. The iron door of the chute was welded shut, covered in decades of thick, gray cobwebs. According to the blueprint, the coal bin hadn't been used for coal in 40 years. Carlotta stepped into the tight brick enclosure surrounding the chute. She ran her gloved hands over the cold, rough masonry. The ledger contained a sequence of numbers, 412927. They weren't a combination for a traditional padlock, they were coordinates. Counting 4 bricks up from the floor, 1 brick to the right, she pressed firmly against the mortar. It was solid. She checked the numbers again, her heart sinking. Had her grandfather lost his mind completely? Was this all a paranoid delusion? She looked closer at the final digits, 927. September 7th, her father's birthday. Ashwin Mehta had been estranged from his son, Carlotta's father, but the date still lingered in his fractured mind. She counted 9 bricks across the middle row and 7 bricks down. She pressed her thumbs against the rough clay rectangle. With a sharp mechanical click that echoed loudly in the silent basement, the brick depressed an inch into the wall. A deep grinding rumble vibrated through the soles of Carlotta's boots. The entire rear wall of the coal enclosure, a solid slab of masonry weighing several hundred pounds, slowly swung inward on massive hidden steel hinges. Carlotta gasped, raising her lantern. Beyond the brick wall was a small, reinforced concrete vault. The space was barely large enough for 2 people to stand in, but it wasn't empty. Stacked neatly on heavy industrial steel shelving were rows upon rows of dull yellow bricks. Gold bullion. Carlotta stepped into the vault, her breath turning to mist in the freezing air. She reached out with a trembling hand and touched the top bar. It was incredibly heavy, cold, and undeniably real. There were dozens of them, hundreds, Clear's throat. Ashwin Mehta had systematically liquidated his entire estate, converting his fortune into solid, untraceable gold, burying it in the foundation of the home he refused to leave. She was looking at millions of dollars. The $12,000 tax lien was less than a fraction of a single bar. She was rich. She was safe. She would never have to sleep under a wet cardboard box ever again. Incredible. The voice came from the darkness behind her, sharp and laced with malicious glee. Carlotta whipped around, dropping her flashlight. It rolled across the concrete floor, casting long, erratic shadows. Standing in the entrance to the coal chute, blocking her only exit, was the intruder from the night before. It was leaning heavily on a wooden cane, his right leg wrapped in a makeshift splint. In his right hand, leveled directly at Carlotta's chest, was a sleek black handgun. "I have to admit, kid, you're resourceful," the man sneered, taking a painful step into the enclosure. "My name is Greg Harrison. My father is your lawyer." When I saw the file on this estate, I knew the old lunatic was hiding his cash. But gold? This is poetry. Carlotta backed against the steel shelving, the cold metal biting through her jacket. "Your father is trying to help me. You're going to ruin him. My father is a sentimental idiot who works pro bono for street trash." Greg spat, his eyes locked greedily on the stacks of bullion. "You have no idea what it takes to survive in the real world. Now, step out of the vault, slowly." Carlotta's mind raced. She was trapped. Greg had a gun, and he clearly had no intention of leaving any witnesses behind to claim the gold he intended to steal. But Greg didn't know the house. He didn't know the mechanics of the vault, and he hadn't read the ledger. "The vault protects itself," Ashwin had written. "The door answers only to the master's weight." "Okay," Carlotta said, her voice shaking. Feigning absolute terror, she raised her hands in surrender. "Just take it. I don't want to die. I just want to leave." "Knock. Ah, smart girl." Greg chuckled, lowering the gun slightly as he limped forward, his eyes intoxicated by the fortune gleaming in the lantern light. Carlotta took a step forward, moving toward the heavy brick door. As Greg stepped past her into the small concrete vault, entirely consumed by the sight of the gold, Carlotta saw her opening. She didn't run for the stairs. Instead, she dropped to her knees and grabbed the heavy iron crowbar she had left on the floor. With all her meager strength, she swung it backward, smashing it directly against the mechanical locking lever mounted on the outside of the vault wall. The heavy steel hinges screamed. The massive brick-faced door immediately released from its open position, swinging shut with terrifying speed, propelled by a counterweight system hidden in the walls. Greg spun around, his eyes widening in horror. "No, wait!" Slam. The impact shook dust from the basement ceiling. The heavy locking bolts engaged with a deep, authoritative, soundproof, reinforced concrete box. A muffled, frantic pounding echoed from behind the thick brick wall. Completely stripped of its power, Carlotta sat on the cold dirt floor of the basement, gasping for air, her entire body shaking violently. She stared at the solid wall for a long time, the silence of the house slowly returning, wrapping around her, not like a threat, but like a protective blanket. She reached into her pocket, pulling out the new prepaid phone. Her hands were steady as she dialed 911. 6 months later, the coastal town of Astoria barely recognized the property at 442 Briarwood Lane. The peeling gray paint was gone, replaced by a warm, inviting Victorian blue with crisp white trim. The shattered windows had been replaced with beautiful stained glass. The swaggering porch was structural and reinforced, currently holding a row of comfortable rocking chairs. Inside, the house was alive. The smell of mildew was replaced by the scent of fresh pine, baking bread, and the sound of voices. Carlotta Evans, wearing a pristine white sweater and carrying a clipboard, walked through the newly renovated library. The hidden compartment in the wall was permanently sealed, replaced by towering shelves of brand new books. The legal battle had been swift. When the police arrived and opened the vault, they arrested Greg Harrison on the spot. Thomas Harrison, devastated by his son's betrayal, had personally overseen the immediate sale of 3 gold bars to clear the property taxes and establish an airtight legal trust for Carlotta. The remaining $4.2 million in bullion was legally transferred to her name, heavily taxed, but immensely life-changing. But Carlotta hadn't bought a sports car or a mansion in Beverly Hills. She remembered the cold rain. She remembered the gnawing hunger. She remembered the feeling of being entirely invisible to the world. The Meta estate was no longer a monument to a paranoid man's isolation. It was now the Briarwood Foundation, a fully funded, state-of-the-art transitional housing center for homeless youth. It was a place where kids who had been thrown away by their families could find a warm bed, a hot meal, and a second chance at life. Standing in the grand foyer, watching 2 teenage girls laugh as they carried boxes of supplies into the kitchen, Carlotta looked down at the brass key in her hand. Her grandfather had built a fortress to keep the world out, but she had torn down the walls, used his buried treasure, and finally found the one thing she had been searching for all along. She had found a home. If you enjoyed this incredible journey of survival and uncovering hidden secrets, please smash that like button and share this story with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more thrilling, real-life dramatic tales delivered straight to your feed. Hit the notification bell so you never miss a wild story. What would you do if you found millions hidden in your walls? Let us know below.